The Senate Finance Committee is now in a voting session. What are we going to start with? Okay, good. Okay, Patrick.
Start with biometric.
Who we missing, Kramer?
No, he's here. He just walked out. He's coming. No, so
Yeah,
let's start with
let's just
some.
start with the.
So House Bill 259 was where we left off at the last voting session. This is the biometric data privacy bill, and there should be a second packet that's been circulated, and on it it says House Bill 259 packet number 2, and then there's Hayes amendment. And so, Senator, I think we left off with me describing an amendment that's been offered by Senator Hayes. And so his amendment is reflected here. So let me just review that. On page 2, what the Hayes amendment would do is exempt from the bill biometric data collected for certain purposes. And the purposes that are laid out here are the biometric data collected, used, disclosed, or processed in order to prevent, detect, protect against, or respond to security incidents, identity theft. This is page 2 of the reprint, 144402 in the italicized language. And this is in the reprint number 2. Should be listed on the top of Okay. So I'm looking at reprint number 2, packet number 2, House Bill 259, packet number 2, Hayes amendment, page number 2. The italicized language exempts from the bill biometric data collected for certain purposes. This would be data collected, used, disclosed, or processed in order to prevent, detect, protect against, or respond to security incidents, identity theft, fraud, harassment, or malicious, deceptive, or legal activity. It also would exempt from the bill data to preserve the integrity or security of systems, or to investigate, report, or prosecute a person for a violation of a law or a policy, rule, or other standard related to an activity described under these categories that are listed above.
I apologize. I don't see where we are.
So this is packet number 2. It says House Bill 259, packet number 2,
And then it's on page 2 of that
and it's
packet.
on page 2.
I'm so happy. Merci beaucoup.
Okay.
So this would exempt this category of biometric data from the scope of the bill.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
So, just to be clear, and the issue of fraud security is really, really important. So I'm going to acknowledge that. Also, law enforcement, really important. And so if you look through the reprint, like the bill that, absent the Hayes Amendment, there are like numerous provisions in here specifically dealing with security and fraud prevention that we've put in a completely different category. And we've also in the bill are several provisions dealing with law enforcement and the disclosure of biometric information. What the amendment, how it's drafted, it would basically say that all these categories of collection of biometric information can be sold, the whole point of the bill is we want to have some guardrails. It doesn't preclude the collection of it, but some reasonable guardrails on the disclosure, the collection, and the sale of your unique biometric information. And so this is kind of a big by the way it's drafted and where it's put it, by exempting all of this, I just would, and I'll certainly let Senator Hayes respond, but there are, the issues contemplated in the amendment, I think, are sufficiently incorporated within other parts of the bill, specifically for security and fraud, law enforcement, which, you know, have special provisions for disclosure related to all that. So I don't want to add that much more. Like, big picture, that's kind of how I see it.
Could you help me out? You said, so it could be sold. I don't see that in the amendment.
Well, your amendment, if your amendment were to be adopted, all this collection
Could
of
be
all this
sold.
biometric information.
Where in that amendment does it say so it could be sold?
Well, because you're exempting it from the entire bill.
Right.
That's the
And
way
that's the
you're,
problem we're trying to eliminate now. It's not having it sold to third parties for no good reason except for their profit.
Right, but in the case where there is an investigation to verify the identity of an individual, so that information won't get to someone else, that was the purpose of the amendment. I don't know if there's a recommendation to clean it up, but the purpose of it, I don't see, at least in this amendment as drafted, where it says for the purpose of selling the
But
information.
but when you say it doesn't apply to the whole bill, it means it
In the
can't.
cases of investigation. So when they're investigating things like security incidents, fraud, or harassment, just an example that I provided the other day, it's so easy to get into someone's email and to impersonate someone else. It lends itself to an opportunity for fraud or other things where someone may be taken advantage of.
But the way it's worded, it does the opposite of what I think you're trying to do.
Senator Augustine weigh in.
Senator Augustine.
Yeah, I mean, just in keeping with what the chair said, the bill as drafted, not the amendment, but the bill as drafted, it contemplates just that. I mean, that's what's been put in, would be struck from the bill. We put protections in here, into this bill, that would allow for someone who is dealing with fraud to be able to collect that information. Now, we still have protections and guardrails, like the chair said, on there, but we put that in here, Senator, so that it would be able to do that, but that what would not occur is that there would be no protections from someone's ability to use your biometrics, which is what your amendment will end up doing. It'll end up allowing
Then-
folks to do, basically, to claim that this is what they're doing, and then they can do whatever they want with the data because they're exempted from it. So if they were to get your fingerprint and they made that claim, they could sell it because it's no longer in the bill. That's the reason why I think that it makes sense for us to go with what we already have, which is the protections that are there, and to resist this amendment.
Okay.
Okay. Senator Jennings.
So I just have a question, and I understand selling the data to like a third-party company for them to use it, but a lot of this stuff is used with IT companies, with security of their systems. What if a company is sold? You know, a small contracting company is bought out by a bigger contracting company, and that data is in their servers for their employees. Would that be considered selling the data?
Well, I mean, I think the definition of sell, under the bill as amended, is probably the first place to look, and that's the provision of data for monetary or other valuable consideration by a private entity to a third party. So there may be a question there, you know, whether that transaction would constitute a sale.
That doesn't relate to this amendment.
It doesn't.
That we're talking about right now, though. I mean, right
But-
now, we're still talking about his amendment.
But the issue is, this outlines certain parameters, right? Security incidents, identity theft, fraud, harassment, or malicious deceptive of illegal activity. And so if they went ahead and sold it, that would be in violation of what we're saying that this information could be used for. So you're saying, you all are saying that the way you read the amendment, the way that you interpret it, I don't agree with you, I don't interpret it that way, but you're saying this allows them to go ahead and sell it. And what this amendment specifically says, it lays out those, what is it, 1, 2, 3, 6 categories by which they would be exempt from the information. So if they went ahead and sold the information, that's not included in what's enumerated in this language.
But that's not how it's set up. The way
Right.
it's set up is that they would not be subject to the legislation at all. You're exempting them out from the protections that we're creating for biometrics. That's what
Once
you're
you-
doing.
Yeah, once you exempt them, then they can do anything they want.
Because the protections are not there today. So remember, we're trying to create protections right now for our biometric information. And I think we all want protections for our biometric information.
I agree. I
That's
just
what we're
think that
trying
the
to
bill
do.
overreaches a little bit and doesn't provide opportunities for nuances.
Well, that's where we said, where we put the additional language in, the original, to try to address your concerns, to allow for folks to be able to do the things that you're talking about as far as fraud. It's specifically laid out. Patrick can talk about it. As far as those matters that you're talking about, but to do it with some guardrails, like the
So
vice
this
chair said.
language was put in since our last voting session where we went on.
No, it was in there, but the reason why it got pulled out, Senator, is because when you put yours in, it strikes that language, but it's in there if yours is not there. You see what I'm saying?
Nope.
I should explain
I hear
that,
you.
Yeah.
if I may. So in the Hayes Amendment, the first part of it is the exemption for this data from the scope of the bill entirely. If you go to page 4 of the reprint, you see that there was a subsection B here, and this is language starting with line 8 down through line 30 on page 4 of the reprint. That's subsection B. That part of the bill under the amendment,
Under your amendment,
under your amendment,
would negate all those provisions.
it's 9 of 11, but handwritten 4. So, okay. So this is the provision that's in the bill that creates this exception from the consent requirements for data when collected for fraud or security purposes. And then, so you don't have to get consent under the bill's language when using the technology for that, but you do have to post a notice that you're collecting it. But because that kind of data, under your amendment, would be exempted from the bill altogether, there's no reason for this more limited protection to exist. And so that provision has been struck from the bill. But wanted to flag that amendment so you could see how those two things work together.
Can I?
Okay, Senator Reed.
Sure.
So just in asking a follow-up on that, so I see where all the language is struck, but the new language from the Senator Hayes amendment, this subtitle does not apply with respect to biometric data collected, used, disclosed, processed. In order to, it lists several things here, none of which would be able to, whether you're trying to prevent identity theft or harassment, none of that would be accomplished by selling the data. So couldn't we just add another line to make it clear that you can't sell the data if you had to strike that other language? I'm just asking, I don't really have a dog in the fight here, I'm just trying to get to the bottom of it, I guess.
Okay.
Go ahead.
First of
Senator
all,
Pelley.
you're looking at the reprint if Senator Hayes' amendment were adopted. I think you also need to look at the bill that we went through on the other reprint, which I'll say again, when it talks about fraud, security, law enforcement, we've created, I think, starting with the private entity, it does not even include police. We talked about that, state government, and all the rest. But more importantly, when we talk about the collection of this, the idea that you can, there's exceptions for disclosure without consent to law enforcement concerning potential violations of federal, state, or local law. You've got other provisions dealing with the collection, a whole multitude of security and fraud prevention that do not require consent like other kinds of information. So I don't know that you can sort of look in a vacuum at the reprint there without looking at the provisions that are in the other reprint, which contemplate collecting this information. Nothing in the bill precludes anybody from collecting information. The question is, what can you do with that information, and to whom do you require, what kinds of things would require consent? And we've said that you don't require consent if it's for security, fraud, disclosures to law enforcement, and all the like. And so I don't want to, I think we're going around in circles here, but if you carve out this from the entirety of the bill, then currently there is no guardrails at all. There are no parameters. You can do anything with this information. It has, it's not so much about selling, it's about disclosing, collecting, and doing whatever you want. The whole point of the bill is to try to put some parameters and guardrails. The amendment would exempt this from any of that. I really can't put it any clearer than that, but.
And we're in the no guardrail world right now, so you need some. Okay. All right, what is your pleasure? Anybody got a motion?
On this amendment or the bill?
Well, I don't know. What do you
Just going
want?
through amendments at this
Yeah,
point,
okay.
various amendments.
Okay.
I'll second.
I'm not sure I really understand the
Are
difference
you moving
between-
your amendment, Senator?
And I second it.
Okay, well, let's just vote on
Wait a minute.
it. Vote it
I,
down.
I'm not so sure I understand the difference between what has been proposed by Senator Hayes and what's found on page 6, no, not 6, page 8 of the first bill. What's the difference?
Senator Hayes's amendment would take away any guardrails so that you could do what you want with all of this. I don't think that's what his intention is, but the way it's worded, that is what it would do.
Do you agree with that, Senator Hayes?
Well, he doesn't understand.
Well, I do, Senator Benson. I definitely do. It
Well-
does just that. That's what it does. It removes the guardrail from these particular things such that if somebody got your fingerprint, I'm fine with that. If somebody got your fingerprint now and they made these claims, these people would be exempted out from the protections that we're trying to put into
Into the law.
this bill for your biometrics. And that's why I'm resisting this amendment, although Senator Hayes has obviously got a move in a second. So like you said, we can vote on it.
Okay, do you want to just take a vote?
Or do we have a motion?
We got a favorable and a second.
Oh, on his amendment. All right. All right, we're voting on the Hayes
Do a roll
amendment.
call, Ms.
All right, let's do a roll call.
Senator Feldman?
No.
No. Senator Klausmeyer? Pass. Pass. Senator Benson? Pass. Senator Kramer?
On the favorable, I'm going yes.
Yes. Senator Hayes? Yes. Senator Reedy? Pass. Senator Augustine?
No.
No. Senator Hershey? No. Senator Jennings?
This is the Hayes amendment.
I know that, I'm trying to deal with it in my head, I mean, I understand his argument, and I understand his argument. But I'm looking at the question I asked about selling it to third party, or selling of a company and stuff, so I'll go yes.
Senator Jennings, yes.
You vote, Madam Chair?
She didn't
Madam
call me.
Chair.
No.
No. 4 no, 3 yes.
All right. Four
Senator
noes, three-
Klausmeyer?
I'm still passing.
Pass.
Okay.
Senator Benson?
And I'm going to explain my pass. I'm with Senator JB. And I just am overwhelmed with this bill. That's all I can say. And the only time we ever talk about it is when we're just getting ready to vote for other things. And I'm looking at all these other things and people are giving me all kinds of different
okay.
amendments.
Okay,
So
so what,
keep me past.
so what do we have?
Senator Benson? Yes?
Go back to Benson.
Senator Reedy?
We can't pass this bill.
No.
I share the ambivalence, though. I'm just not quite sure. I'm saying no. If I'm not sure, I'm gonna say no.
Okay. What do we have now?
5 no, 4 yes.
All right, the amendment dies. Okay. You want to go back to the bill unamended?
I think we can keep going through the amendments.
Okay.
It makes sense to take up the vital amendments last.
Okay.
So unfortunately, we're jumping around back to the original reprint. So if everybody, yes, so if everyone could just get the other reprint, this is the one that says, that on the top of it says Feldman Augustine amendments. So then if you go to page, okay, so page 18 of the reprint. Page 18 of the reprint, this is an amendment offered by Senator Kramer. And so this bill relates to a provision on page 19, handwritten of the reprint. And this is the provision, that under the bill that came over from the House, this says that a private entity may not condition the provision of a service on the collection, use, disclosure, transfer, sale, or processing of biometric data unless biometric data is strictly necessary to provide the service. What this amendment does, and then actually, if I read the next provision below, then there's a provision that says a private entity may not charge different prices or rates for goods or services or provide a different level or quality of a good or service to an individual who exercises the individual's rights under the bill. So this is a non-discrimination provision. This is a clause that says that this restriction may not be construed to prohibit a private entity from offering a different price, rate, level, quality, or selection of goods or services to an individual, including offering goods or services for no fee if the offer is related to an individual's voluntary participation in a bona fide loyalty, rewards, premium features, discounts, or club card program. So in other words, it's creating a savings clause or a protection for these types of rewards programs from this restriction in the bill.
Senator Kramer.
Madam Chair and colleagues, it was my understanding that the goal of the bill was not to do harm in this sector, but there was questions that it could. So this is really just clarifying to ensure that where you have loyalty, like Sam's or Costco or whatever it may be, that we're not stripping away their ability to have special offers for their members and things like that. So this is clarifying language, and I would move favorable on the amendment.
Senator Augustine.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I just want to kind of like explain what this amendment, what it really is saying, okay? So we're talking about like when we go to Walgreens or something like that and we get you all know how you get like the special pricing because, you know, for me, I just put in a phone number or whatever and they give me a lower price. Like that's the kind of program that we're talking about here. That's that loyalty program that we're talking about. This bill, first of all, doesn't do anything with regard to loyalty programs. Because remember, this bill is only about the biometric data. That's all that it's about. That's the only thing that this touches. So this is the scenario and the reason to not adopt Senator Kramer's amendment. The person, we go into Walgreens, and instead of a phone number, Walgreens says, with this amendment, give me your fingerprint. Give me your fingerprint, and then I'll give you the lower price. Give me a fingerprint. Now, that, to me, is coercive for stuff that you can't get back your fingerprint, you can't get back your iris. You can't get those things back. So if I'm in there, I think this is the reason for the provision. I don't think it makes sense for us to create a situation where a senior is in there and they feel like in order to get this savings, that they got to give their fingerprint or their iris in order to get this. That's what this amendment is trying to allow to happen. Now, the folks right now in the loyalty programs aren't doing this. They're not, but that's what this amendment would allow to occur. And so that's why, to me, again, we're trying to protect here. We're trying to protect. This is the reason why, to me, we should not adopt this amendment, because it is only about biometric information and nothing else. That's what this piece of legislation is, and that's what this would apply to.
Okay, Senator Feldman and Senator Kramer.
Beyond the seniors at Leisure World or whoever have to give up their biometric data in order to get into the loyalty program, let's put that argument aside. The other part of it is the argument about concern about lawsuits, if you like violate. So just to be clear, number one, apparently none of this is being collected now at all. It's not being sold. And the provisions of the bill specifically say that unless you're selling it, there would be no private cause of action. So there's no scenario under which there's any private cause of action attached to any of the loyalty program stuff here. But in acknowledgement of the fact that Senator Kramer is bringing this, there is a provision in the uncodified language that has been inserted into the bill. And if you go to page 11, there's actually what's been inserted is on section 2, a specific language that says that there should be a review by the AG of all the bona fide loyalty offerings, rewards, premiums, features that require collection, and maybe in the future they will start to collect this biometric data. They're not currently doing it, so nothing in the bill really applies to the current loyalty programs, including a summary, et cetera. So we're passing the bill with the idea that there should be some review to see if this is an issue. If they start to collect, which they're currently not collecting this data, they're not selling it, they're not subject to any lawsuits because they're not doing what the bill's even envisioning. But the AG should still monitor what's going on to see if, in fact, there is some collection of this and there are some problems, and we can always revisit this issue and adjust it. So I hear the issue, but the concern about being sort of shaken down to say, I got to give my fingerprint or I can't get into your loyalty program. I guess the question for Senator Kramer is, does that scenario concern you at all?
The scenario that causes me concern is that this is ripe for litigation. So despite the representations from my friend from Prince George's that it's unequivocal that it does not apply to these loyalty programs, the language in the amendment does nothing more than make sure that it is not applying, and it does not go beyond that scope. This is language that has been adopted in 3 other states on the same issue for this very reason, because this is a litigator's dream if we do not incorporate this language, and then every retail business in the state is going to be exposed to litigation when the lawyers look at this and say, no, you violated it. And so the whole point here is, as represented, It's not supposed to address these loyalty programs. The amendment does nothing more than clarify that very issue, and it does no harm to the bill. And quite frankly, without this language, I, for one, will not be voting for the bill. So,
But can you point to, seriously, where in the bill would there be exposure to a lawsuit if you're not collecting or selling the information? Where in the bill would it possibly be interpreted to expose anybody to a lawsuit? Where in the bill do you see that?
I see it right by virtue of the language that says you cannot do these things. And then we find ourselves, or the retail industry in the state finds themselves having to defend against a lawsuit when an attorney says, hey, we think maybe this is a practice that you're doing, and you have this loyalty program, and we're going to file a class action suit.
Madam Chair, I'll leave it at that, but just the final point is the bill very, very specifically says the only time you would be subject to a private cause of action lawsuit is if you sell biometric information, which has been told here that is not happening. So that's number one. And then number two, this bill has been limited, private cause of action, specifically to not be like Illinois. It specifically says you'd have to prove actual damages. You can't. But the main thing is you have to sell it to be exposed to a
And
lawsuit.
my question for you, Mr. Vice Chair, is where do you see the harm from that language? How does this do harm to the bill and to the goal? I didn't ask you, Senator.
Okay, I will go with Senator Augustine's point about someone being under duress to have to give up their biometric information in order to get into a loyalty program. That is a policy call. That seems not something, that I think from a policy standpoint we should be putting on folks. So there's that. And there is no threat to lawsuit because the bill doesn't contemplate this particular. But I hear you. I mean, we have obviously a difference of view on this one, but I'll sort of stop at that.
Okay, Senator Benson.
Yes, we right now are dealing with the private right.
No, I think it's Senator Kramer has an amendment that we're discussing. Right.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That specifically addresses the private right to action.
No.
My concern is that the way the bill is written, we would have problems with
It would open the door for lawsuits.
correct. And the only thing this language does is create clarity to prevent that from happening. And I would proffer that it does nothing more than that. And if it turns out at some point in time, there is harm by virtue in the future of this language, we can come back at any given time, revisit the issue, and incorporate it, or strike this from the law.
Well, that has been,
Wait a minute.
I know that
saw
has
Rita
been
first.
a constant concern of a number of groups that have come in to see me. That little piece that deals with the private right.
Okay, all right, let's hear from Senator Reedy and Senator Augustine, and after that, I think I'm about to suggest that we suspend action on this today, and 2 or 3 of you get together and figure out what you're willing to vote on, so we can get to other bills. Senator Reedy and then Senator Augustine.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm willing to vote on it today, but, we could do whatever you want. I guess my question is, or what I was thought about was, when you talk about giving a fingerprint, if anybody is doing a loyalty program where they're asking for their customer's fingerprint, I'd be the first one in line to say, yeah, we're gonna ban that practice, but if you're dumb enough to give somebody your fingerprint, you probably deserve, I mean, honestly, what are we talking about here? I think the gentleman's amendment is just trying to make sure we don't have some lowered barrier of getting into court based on legislation we offer. I don't necessarily see the problem with making it clear in the language. And if we find out that some company, well, I guess we shouldn't name names, but some example of some company is doing this and selling people stuff, I mean, I think we would have a long line of people ready to quickly take action on it. I mean, that's just my opinion on it.
Okay, Senator Augustine, and then we're gonna move on.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I'm dumb enough, Senator Reedy. I'll tell you how. I gave the answer on the floor when we were talking about the other bill. When I went to the amusement park, it was a great place. I gave him my fingerprint. In order for me to be able to access something, I want to get ahead in the line. That was enough, right? You're right. But here's the deal. The deal is this. What am I gonna do now? Because there's no protections that are out there for that. But that's what this bill is about, is to create those protections so that they don't. That's what it's for. Let's just be real about it, okay? Senator Benson, when somebody goes and they see, just like I did, they go and they see that they can get a lower price in order to do it, they're gonna give them that information. And then what happens after that? It gets sold, it gets lost. The problem with waiting till after the fact is that there is no recovery from the loss of your fingerprint. It's gone. There is no recovery from the loss of your iris. It's gone. That's why I would resist this amendment.
Senator Jennings.
So I understand the issue about that's coming up, but where we're moving with security is what's called multi-factor authentication. When you log into your email, you got to use your password. That's something you know. It comes down to something you know, something you have, somewhere you are, or something you are. Nowadays you have multi-factor authentication. Disney World has it. You get your card, you have to have that, but then you also have to put your thumb on that thing when you go into the gate. Something you have is they'll send you a unique code on your phone when you log into your email. Somewhere you are is when you log into your bank from a strange computer, they'll send you a notification saying, hey, you're not signing in from your normal IP address. And then finally, something you are is, in fact, your eyes, retina, facial. But we talked about your facial, I think the picture's okay. I look at this as the bigger picture of a loyalty program. It sounds something simple like a Safeway card, but when you get into bigger loyalty programs like a Marriott Rewards card where you got 1 million points, they want to make sure that that guy who's booking that reservation is who they say they are, because that's thousands of dollars that's going to go away. And Senator Klausmeyer kind of hit it on the head. We only talk about this bill in a voting session. We always have work groups in this committee. We haven't put one for this thing where we've been able to work this thing out. So I don't know where I am with this bill, so. Isn't that so?
I'm gonna let the vice chair have the.
Madam Chair, I'll be the last word and then we'll
Vice
move
chair
on.
have the last word, and we are gonna move on.
I do want to, because I think it's been so long since we actually I did have the cross-file of the bill, and people forget it was back in the beginning of February. But just a couple things. The bill that was co-sponsored by Augustine Benson, Hayes, Kramer, and Klausmeyer, the co-sponsors of the cross-file bill. But in any event, at the hearing, polling down at the end of 2020, 90% of Marylanders want some guardrails on this biometric information. And number two, and this was important, we had testimony at the bill hearing on the Senate bill, study after study, the flaws, particularly in the facial recognition technology, particularly Harvard found face recognition technology 34% more likely to make an error when identifying Black and Latino folks than light-skinned males, a lot of racial disparity in terms of accuracy. Another study in 2019 that said Asian Black folks 100 times more likely to be misidentified. So there's problems with this technology already, and the idea that it's just out there, and so folks want some guardrails. I just made that point at the bill hearing back in February. I just want to refresh on that bill sponsored by Augustine, Benson, Hayes, Kramer, Klausmeyer, and Feldman. Thank you, Madam Chair.
What I'd like to do, colleagues, is put this on hold for tonight, and let's vote some of these other bills. If we got time at the end to come back to it, if we don't, I'll see if some of you want to work in a work group, because we need some consensus. We can't take up all our time on the one bill. Yeah.
Quickly, in response to the vice chair's comments, none of that related whatsoever to the amendment that I offered the committee. So I appreciate and value the overall umbrella sense of this is good, we need to do something. It did not relate at all to the amendment that was before the committee. With that, Madam Chair, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So Patrick, you got another. Hold on to your paperwork in case some of you want to do a work group and come back to us. I don't know.
Up to the chair.
We are done with this bill tonight, so let's move on.
Ready to switch gears. Okay, so House Bill 305 is the next bill on the list. This is the bill that alters circumstances under which certain property held by a banking or financial organization or business association in the state is presumed to be abandoned. Under the bill, a returned mail trigger is adopted so that property is presumed abandoned 3 years after the later of the date the holder is deemed to no longer have a valid address for the owner of the property, or pursuant to current law, the date the owner has last interacted with the banking or financial organization or business association through certain actions. The bill also establishes when a property holder is deemed to no longer have a valid address for the owner of the property. There's some email notice elements to it. If a holder of the property doesn't send communications to an owner by first-class mail, the holder of the property must attempt to confirm the owner's interest in the property by emailing the owner within 2 years after the owner's last indication of interest in the property. And then the bill requires attempts to contact the apparent owner by first-class mail when email communications are not effective in reaching the owner. The bill also specifies that the running of this 3-year period of abandonment ceases immediately on the holder obtaining a valid address for the owner of the property or the occurrence of certain actions regarding the owner's property. And then the sponsor of the bill, Delegate Kerr, has offered an amendment to correct an issue that I think came into the bill when it was being drafted. The amendment that the sponsor is offering strikes a provision establishing when future dividends, distributions, and other sums held by depository institutions commences a new period of abandonment. A similar provision like this in current law is applicable to stock certificates held by business associations, but this was inadvertently and incorrectly applied to depository institutions in the drafting process. So the amendment strikes that provision from the bill to correct that issue. I don't think there was any opposition to the bill when it was heard.
All right, what is your pleasure?
As amended.
Okay, we've got a motion to move it with as amended. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor, please raise your hand. All right, that's unanimous.
Senate Bill 971 requires the Maryland Department of Health and the Behavioral Health Administration to ensure that the specialty mental health system has an adequate network of providers available to provide alcohol and drug abuse treatment for children younger than 18. Senator Klausmeier has offered an amendment that does two things based on a request from some testimony that was heard on the House bill last week. The amendment would change some terminology in the bill that I think is understood to be more clinically acceptable, so that the bill wouldn't relate to substance abuse treatment, but instead would relate to substance use disorder treatment. And then the second amendment makes the bill an emergency measure.
I'll move favorable as amended.
And I'll second that.
Okay, is there any discussion on the bill as amended? All in favor, please raise your hand. All right, that's unanimous. Okay.
House Bill 1127, this is, so the committee heard Senator Klausmeier's Senate bill, but I think it was introduced late, and so the committee hasn't acted on it, but this bill is the House cross-file to that Senate bill. And what it does is it requires the state designated exchange to operate as a health data utility for the state and provide data as allowed by law to individuals and organizations involved in the treatment and care coordination of patients and to support public health goals. Under the bill, prescription drug dispensers must submit prescription information to the state-designated exchange, and the state-designated exchange may not impose any fees or other assessments on dispensers to support the operation of it. The Healthcare Commission must adopt regulations to carry out the bill, and the state-designated exchange must establish a consumer advisory council to bring the perspectives of individuals and organizations with an interest in protecting consumers into the delivery of services provided by the state-designated exchange. The Healthcare Commission, the Department of Health, and the state-designated exchange must submit a report to the General Assembly that identifies ongoing revenue sources to fund the activities required under the bill. I don't think there was any opposition to the bill at the committee hearing.
All right, Senator Reedy?
So, I'm just looking through the testimony. I know we had the hearing, but I'm not sure if, I'm not remembering it very well, to be honest. A couple questions or concerns here. So there was some favorable with amendments. I assume all the amendments that have been drafted are with like MedCai and some of the ones that those are all the amendments that are on here.
Right.
Why? We have CRISP. Like, why do we need, what's the burning need for this? I know that's a question to ask at the
Sure.
hearing, but I'm just asking now.
Yeah, so I think maybe I could read from an excerpt from the testimony from CRISP. It's probably helpful. And this is an example of why they maintain that the bill is critical. When the pandemic first happened, state and local health departments wanted to understand whether COVID testing was accessible to all Marylanders. Later, they wanted to ensure vaccines were broadly available. CRISP generated reports that included race, ethnicity, and geography so public health officials could reach out to underserved communities and improve equity. When it comes to new COVID antiviral drugs, however, we do not have dispensed medication data, so we cannot know today whether they are being distributed equitably, and the bill
Okay.
would fix that. So that was one rationale that was provided.
Okay, a question that I have is, when we say there's gonna be data being stored with the health exchange, is that anonymized? Is it aggregate? Is it individualized? What are we talking about?
Yeah, so it's my understanding that some of it is de-identified data, and also note that individuals can opt out from sharing their information to CRISP. This was in a bill that was enacted last year.
So they can opt out of this then too? Is that in
Correct,
the
they
bill?
can opt out of information sharing to CRISP, right.
But okay. Just trying to understand, when you start telling me we're gonna store everybody's health data with a state agency, we just had a whole discussion about biometric data, so, and this isn't biometric data, I understand, but just trying to,
I guess I should clarify, I do think that this information is linkable to individuals because part of the purpose of CRISP is to facilitate care coordination. So that would be a use for healthcare providers who are linked to CRISP. But I think the important factor is that individuals can opt out of having their information shared.
okay, so this is, like, in the fiscal, this is like the reason I'm raising a concern. So, the prescription information is being non-controlled prescription drugs, and these dispensers have to submit prescription information to the exchange, the healthcare exchange, by electronic means. There's some other qualifiers to try not to be overly burdensome, but it has to make, then the state exchange has to make prescription data available for the purpose of treatment and care coordination of a patient. Am I wrong that does the state, it feels like is this new information the state will get on every patient in the state, or is this not new information the state will have access to?
Yeah, I think it does add to the information that's being shared through CRISP. So it is adding a new category of health information that's being shared through this health information exchange.
Madam Chair, are we having a voting session tomorrow?
I don't know. At the rate we're
Well, that's why I don't want to hold everybody up, but I wonder if I could hold this bill for
Yeah, everybody can get
a
one
session.
hold.
Okay.
Okay,
I'd just like to look at it a little more closely. Thank you.
okay. All right, let's move to the next.
Sell it on the internet.
Okay,
All right, come on, we're not making much progress here.
House Bill 1336. This is the bill that establishes the Greater Baltimore Transit Governance and Funding Commission to study, review, and make recommendations on certain issues related to transit governance and funding for the Baltimore area transit system. Among other matters, the commission must review the findings of the Baltimore Transit Governance and Funding Commission, study. They have to review the findings of the Baltimore Regional Transit Governance and Funding Study and make recommendations regarding changes to the funding and governance of transit in the greater Baltimore region. I don't think there was any opposition to the bill at the bill hearing.
Favorable.
Okay, any discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, that's unanimous.
Up next on the voting list is Senate Bill 868, which deals with self-directed services under the Developmental Disabilities Administration. So as amended and reflected in the reprint, Senate Bill 868 is identical to House Bill 1020, which is up next on the voting list, and I'll mention passed the House unanimously earlier this session. Senate Bill 868 requires the Developmental Disabilities Administration, in consultation with stakeholders, to establish and provide specified training materials to coordinators of community services on self-directed services. As part of developing a person-centered plan of service, a CCS, that's the Community Coordinators of Community Service, must educate the recipient on the availability of all modes of services available, including self-directed services. And by January 1, 2023, DDA must submit to CMS an amendment to the Community Pathways Waiver that includes overnight supports requirements. And so that's found in.
Second.
There are amendments. Do you want me to address the amendments?
I think we better know what the amendments do. But let him give the amendments and then I'll come right back.
Okay, go ahead.
The amendments, first on page 3 of 10, clarifies that certain services can be family-directed. The amendments further provide on page 8 of 10 that self-directed services provided by DDA shall be provided within the limits of the individual's approved annual budget. Also on page 8 of 10, the amendments reduce the required hours of monthly support broker services from 40 hours to 30, and requires that the Department of Health report on the utilization of services under the bill and the fiscal impact of providing those services. There was no opposition at the committee hearing.
All right, now, you still,
Yes, ma'am. This bill. Nathan had explained that this bill and the very next bill, if amended, they'll be in the same position. So I was saying, if we take a vote, could we just vote on both of them at the same time to save some time?
no, I think we better.
Okay, that's fine.
Now, I just have a quick question. Where did those amendments come from?
So the amendments on the bill before you were offered by the bill's sponsor, and they do align the bill with the bill that passed the House.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Is there any motion? All right, we've got a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor, raise your hand. All right, let's call the roll.
Senate Bill 868, favorable with amendment. Senator Feldman? Aye. Aye. Senator Klausmeyer?
Yes.
Yes. Senator Benson? Yes. Senator Kramer? Yes. Senator Hayes?
Yes.
Yes. Senator Reedy?
Yes.
Yes. Senator Augustine? Yes. Senator Hershey? Yes. Senator Jennings? Yes. Madam Chair?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
And then the next matter would be House Bill 1020, which is Senator Hayes pointed out, is I can read the amendments again if you'd like. It's identical to Senate Bill 868, which you
Okay.
just voted.
Are they the same amendments as for the crosswalk?
There are no amendments to the House
Okay.
bill.
Why wouldn't we want to amend this? All right, move favorable.
Okay. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor, raise your hand. Is everybody in favor? Okay. Thank you, that's unanimous.
The next bill is House Bill 526, which prohibits a person from providing, attempting to provide, or offering to provide plumbing services and fuel gas services in WSSC jurisdiction without a license.
All right, any discussion on the motion? If not, are you ready for the question? All in favor, raise your hand. Is that everybody? Okay, that's unanimous.
The next bill on the list, House Bill 696, the chair has asked to hold for further discussion and preparation of amendments. So then moving then to House Bill 1222. This bill establishes the Baltimore City Behavioral Health Crisis Incident Review Team in Baltimore City. The committee has not yet received the delegation letter, which Senator Hayes may be able to speak to, but the bill would not be reported until the letter is received. The bill would create the Incident Review Team in Baltimore City to review behavioral health crisis incidents involving law enforcement, identify root causes and patterns within access to public systems that result in behavioral health crises involving law enforcement, provide recommendations based on identified factors that contribute to behavioral health crises involving law enforcement, et cetera, facilitate and the coordination and collaboration among the entities involved, assist in the implementation of procedural, logistical, and clinical changes to minimize the need for law enforcement involvement in behavioral health crises.
Okay, Senator Hayes.
Yes, Madam Chair, we haven't received a delegation letter because but it has nothing to do with this. What I'd like to do, if you would allow us to, is if we would move the bill and not report on it until we get the delegation letter. There's some other dynamics going on between the House and the Senate delegation that has nothing, absolutely nothing to do with this bill. And so if we could at least take a vote on the bill and hold it until we get the letter, greatly appreciate it.
All right, if nobody objects, we could vote. Okay, any discussion on the motion? All right, all in favor, raise your hand. All right, let's call the roll.
House Bill 1222, favorable, Senator Feldman. Aye. Senator Klausmeyer. Yes. Senator Benson. Yes. Senator Kramer. Yes. Senator Hayes. Yes. Senator Reedy.
No.
No. Senator Augustine. Yes. Senator Hershey. No. Senator Jennings. No. Madam Chair.
Yes,
Yes.
all right.
All right, if you go to the other page, but before we get to that page, you have two concurrences. The first concurrence is Senate Bill 27. This is Senator Augustine's bill about Alzheimer's disease and dementia council and coordination of services, Dementia Services Act of 2022. The House amended the bill to look like the House bill, which you all just passed. The main difference between the two bills was the House had a series of mandated appropriations through 2027. So it's Senator Augustine's call.
Okay, we got a motion to concur. Can we get a second? All right, Senator Hayes, your lights on? Okay, all right. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay. Okay, that's unanimous, okay.
Okay? And the next bill to concur on, or not, is, these aren't, yeah, we don't put concurrences on the list, sorry. The next, they come in so fast, it's hard to get them on the list. So the next bill to concur on is Senate Bill 600. This is Senator Kelly's Health Facilities Residential Service Agencies reporting requirement. The House amended the bill. The bill as it came in would have required reports, RSAs to report wages and whether the employee was classified as a residential contractor or not. The House struck the wage reporting requirements from the bill and instead says that the RSAs must report on the number of personal care aides classified by the RSA as employees and independent contractors. It also, there was a report added by amendment. It also requires this report to be transmitted to the Senate Finance Committee and the Health and Government Operations Committee.
Okay, can we get a motion?
That motion died, you come back in a second, vote favorable.
Stand your ground. Don't let him bully you.
Oh, sure.
Madam Chair,
Okay.
that motion died due to a lack of a second, I move favorably.
We deserve the whole bill, Madam
Okay.
Probably moved in a second.
Okay, we got a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? Any discussion? All right, all in favor, please raise your hand. Okay. Senator Jennings? Okay, that's unanimous.
I'm no on concurring.
Getting giddy here.
Okay. The first bill on the top of the list is not for, it's for discussion purposes. This is Senator Augustine's Packaging Materials Producer Responsibility Bill. I'm going to briefly go through a summary of the bill and then point out in the reprint where these things appear, which is in front of you. And the amendments in front are from the sponsor. They make changes primarily to who is in and out of the bill, and some other technical and clarifying changes. They were working with the MDE as well as they were doing this bill. So first, the first part of the bill establishes a statewide recycling needs assessment. It would be conducted by the Maryland Department of Environment's Office of Recycling. The needs assessment would have to be conducted at least every 10 years, and it would be paid for by, as you'll come to later, producer responsibility organizations. These organizations would pay a certain amount of money into a fund, and that fund would pay for this statewide needs assessment. The next part of the bill amends the State Recycling Trust Fund. This is an existing fund, and as I just mentioned, fees from these soon-to-be-discussed producer responsibility organizations would be put into a separate account in the fund to, one, pay for the assessment, the statewide recycling needs assessment, and to help the Maryland Department of Environment administer the producer responsibility for packaging materials provisions in the bill. Third is,
Chair, quick question. So are any of these costs going to the state, or is all of this the companies that do the packaging?
the
Can you clarify?
companies, in order to pay for the statewide needs assessment and for MDE to implement or administer the program, which is about to be, which is established by this, those funds from these producer organizations will go to this special fund to cover those costs.
Okay, but it's not state funds, it's just,
It'll come from these producer responsibility organizations.
okay, thank you.
All right.
Okay? The third part of the bill concerns the establishment of a program that's going to be called Producer Responsibility for Packaging Materials. There's a definition of what are packing materials. Producer is defined, and then there's provisions about who is actually a producer under this law, and who is not a producer under this law. And again, this is where a lot of the amendments offered by the sponsor make some changes. Fourth part of the bill is that these producer responsibility organizations have to register with the Maryland Department of Environment, and this registration program will begin on July 1, 2023. The Maryland Department of Environment, I'll use MDE from now on, has to develop a form. The form will include what entities are in a producer responsibility organization. Producers would be part of this organization. Producers would, in essence, be individual companies who would be operating or dealing with selling products in the state that consist of these packaging materials. It also lists of brands in this registration form, and a list of covered materials, which would be packaging materials. The next part is the producer responsibility organization would have to submit a plan to MDE for their review and approval. This part of the bill would take effect April 1st, 2025. And then after a date picked by MDE, the producer may not sell or distribute packaging materials unless there is a plan in place, and that date is left to be chosen by MDE. MDE must also establish performance goals for these packing materials and financing by these producer responsibility organizations to implement the plan. And they would also have to develop a producer fee structure, and a lot of these fees would go to some of these fees would go for the implementation of or to cover administration of the program and for the needs assessment I just discussed, and also to reimburse local governments for their costs for collecting some of these selected packing materials. Next, the bill establishes a producer responsibility plan advisory council. It's supposed to consist of a broad range of stakeholders as defined in the bill. It's supposed to provide advice to an organization developing a plan and receive and review these producer responsibility plans. And also, in addition, in the bill, local governments may require reimbursement for their costs, again, for collecting some of these materials as identified in the plan. Producer responsibility organization must report on their plans to the Maryland Department of Environment. This annual reporting requirement would begin in March 1st, 2027. And finally, the bill has provisions for MD to adopt regulations. There are enforcement and penalty provisions in the bill too. So quickly to go through the reprint, and I'll point out where all of these are. If you start off on the first couple pages deal with the recycling needs assessment. So you'll see that on page 2 through the first significant changes to what begin on page 4. And this specifies what the content of the statewide recycling needs assessment. There's also, I guess it's no longer composting, it's going to be called organics recycling in keeping with current practice. There's changes throughout the bill on that. If you go to page 5, you'll see in the middle of the page that this needs assessment is to be paid for by the producer responsibility organization. That's lines 20 through 22. The next couple pages amend the state recycling trust fund, and you'll see here, as I just discussed, there's a separate account established, and the monies that come from these producer responsibility organizations on page 6 will go fund the statewide needs assessment and pay the administrative costs of the MDE to administer the program. If you go to, that's on page, yeah, that was page 6 of the reprint. There's a page with one line on it, that's just a function of the reprint. If you go to page 7 of the reprint, this begins the program that will implement producer responsibility in the state of Maryland. And you'll see that there's a definition of, there's a change to local government that they had to specify there was a county or a municipality. You'll see in the middle of the page 7 what a packaging material consists of and what it includes, and it would be carryout bags, bulk goods, takeout and home delivery food service packaging, and beverage containers. And beverage containers are defined up above on lines 6 through 10. And then at the bottom, there are certain exemptions on what is not included as a packaging material. These would be products that include pesticides, because you can't recycle those anyway. And then anything having to deal with medical device, biologic, or diagnostic, or any that is intended for animals, or a product that is for people, all those items would not be considered a packaging material under the bill. Let's go to page 8. There is a definition of what a producer is under the bill. That means a person that is responsible for complying with this subtitle. Producers do not include local governments, nonprofit charitable organizations, or any entity that manufactures a drug device authorized for sale in the United States by the FDA. And then there's a definition of what a producer responsibility organization is, and that's a producer that individually submits a producer responsibility plan, or a nonprofit entity that is the producer responsibility organization created for all these producers to get together and under this organization. And then on the bottom, there's a definition of producer responsibility plan. Go to page 9. This is the operational part of the bill, and this determines what kind of organizations are subject to the requirements of this bill. And you'll see that there is they have to have a physical location in the state. And then there's a series of descriptors here of who these producer organizations are and what kind of producers would have to be participating in those organizations. For example, if you sell, as the example given to me is if you sell a product like Mr. Clean, you would fall under A2 here if the item is sold under a manufacturer's own brand, and it goes on down. It also covers entities that sell online in the state of Maryland too. If you go to the next page, it doesn't have a number, but this provides those who are not considered producers for the purposes of the bill. So it's any entity that generated less than $5 million in gross revenues in a preceding calendar year. They would not have to comply with the bill's requirements, or sold or offered for sale or distributed for sale in the state during the immediately calendar year less than 1 metric ton of packaging material. If you go down further, there are further groups that would not apply, that would have to comply with the bill's provisions. If you own or operate a restaurant, food cart, or similar establishment that is headquartered in the state and primarily sells to members of the public food that is generally intended to be consumed immediately and without the need for further preparation. If you own or operate a single retail establishment in the state, you would not be subject to the bill's provisions. Also, if you're an alcoholic beverage licensed under the state with a statewide license and you generated less than $10 million in gross revenues, you would not be subject to the bill's provisions. Page 10. These concern the parts where producers must register with the Maryland Department of Environment, as I described earlier. They have to submit the plan by April 1st, 2025. Oh, the bottom of the bill starts with, the reprint starts with the actual responsibility plan. So a producer responsibility organization, one has to register with MDE based on criteria established by MDE and specified in the bill. And then each organization would have to submit a plan to MDE. MDE would have to review the plan and approve the plan. And the next several pages all involve what the contents of the plan would be. That would take you through to page 13.
Let me butt in and ask one question before we go further. You had such a long list of operational definitions to determine altogether who's in the bill. Who is going to police this or determine that all of this is met? Because it's a lot.
The Maryland Department of Environment, they would be the regulator and making sure that everybody is in compliance with the provision. It's the Maryland Department of Environment.
Okay, and they're in favor of the bill?
They're okay with the amendments to the bill.
Okay.
Okay, so now let's go to page 13. And at the bottom, this becomes the financing method. So these producer responsibility organizations would have to come up with a financing method, one to pay for to reimburse the state for their, and go into the special fund, and also to come up with a way for local governments to access these funds so they can pay for the cost of collecting the identified items that would be subject to a plan as submitted in the bill. There's a fee, they have to come up with a fee structure for all the producers in the organization. That's on page 14. There has to be an independent evaluation of the plan by a fee structure for each producer in the producer organization to pay for the purposes of the bill.
So the producers would be in charge of the fees?
Yes, the producers would be in charge of the fees.
And the fees are set?
The fees would be set would be overseen by the department, but they would come up with their own fee structure.
So then if you have the fees, and then they would have to pay these fees, but do they pay fees on their products that we're recycling, or they just have, like, say they have to spend $1,000 for the fee? How's the fee set? I mean,
By local jurisdiction, I guess.
Well, it's up to the organization to come up with a fee structure for participating producers that is set in a manner to cover the costs associated with implementing the plan, including the administrative costs of producer response of the organization, reimbursing local governments for costs in accordance with that, and the administration, there's 5 items that this fee would have to take into account. The administrative review, oversight, and enforcement by the department, implementing the strategy and a plan for reducing packaging materials, and implementing the strategy in the plan for improving reuse, organics, recycling, and recycling in the state. So those are the 5 criteria when setting a fee for the producers in the producer responsibility organization to accomplish the purposes of the bill.
what page is that, David?
That's on page 14,
Okay, I'm ahead of that, okay.
Okay.
I see it.
okay?
So the fee would be set by?
It would be set by the producer organization.
All right, Senator Hershey.
Yeah, David, I'm not sure I understand it. So this legislation is going to implement a tax on the producers of packaging, and that tax is going to be set by some outside organization?
I think you should let Senator Augustine
Yeah,
field that
please.
one.
Yeah, that's not exactly how it's set up. The way it's set up is that the producer responsibility organization, which is comprised of the producers themselves and other entities, they do come up with a rate for basically for the recycling of their item. So let's say it's a bottle, right? And the way that it's set up is when it gets back down to our municipality costs them a certain amount of money for them to have to recycle that item. And so we're trying to make sure that the cost of recycling that item is built into the fee that's at the beginning of the cycle, such that it gets charged in the beginning, that money that it costs to recycle it is put there, okay? So that money is then sent to the municipality for them to be able to recycle the item. Right now, we are paying for it in probably like in our property taxes and stuff like that, because we already gotta pay for the recycling, because the recycling market has collapsed. So we got a cost that our locals have to pay, that our local entities have to pay in order to do our recycling. All that this is trying to do is just trying to say, instead of having it get paid through our property taxes and everything else, let's put it where it really belongs, which is inside of the item that that's actually being recycled. And if it costs less to recycle it, there's less of a fee associated with the piece. So it provides an incentive for it to reduce that packaging, to make that packaging in a manner that's more recyclable, while supporting our recycling activity back at home.
All right, but 2 parts on, who is this organization?
We're creating that organization. So in other states.
I'm sorry, real quick, is it a function of state government, and is it housed in the Department of?
No, it's outside.
Environment? So it's some other group?
Yeah, it's an outside entity that's put together by the state, that the stakeholders are part of. So Senator, like what you're saying is right. So for example, in Maine, they did it the other way, where they did it where everything is inside the state. The state is determining the cost. The state is determining how much they're going to charge them and everything else. The way that we're contemplating doing this here in Maryland is to allow the stakeholders, for all the stakeholders to actually be a part of the conversation, instead of having the government determine what that fee would be. So those producers are a part of the group that is establishing what those costs are that we're trying to recover from recycling. So they're at the table to be a part of that conversation, such that we are able to get, basically they're participating in that process, so that we, in the end, we increase our recycling rates, but we're also reducing the cost at the same time.
All right, final thing, you said recycling has, I guess, you said fallen apart, or,
No, it's not that it's falling apart. So what happened was, what used to be that the Chinese would buy all our recycling materials. They would buy them all. So our locals would make money on it.
right.
You know what I'm saying? But they stopped. They stopped buying our recyclable materials. And so what that did, it changed it from recycling being something that our locals made money on,
Right.
to something that our locals got to pay for. And so when that happened, right, what this bill tries to do is say, okay, let's try to get the things that still can be recycled, right? Because they don't cost us. Things like you heard, the clear plastic drinking bottle. You heard when they said that in the hearing, how can be like completely recycled. Like, so there's a market to buy that back. But there are other things that there is not a market for, okay? And so that's what this is trying to do, understanding that China no longer in bulk just buys all our recycling materials. They've stopped doing that.
But are you seeing various fees for different products then?
Yes, that's the whole point of the PRO, is to say, right, that we want to, because they should be different. They should be different. Everything shouldn't be the same. If it is something that is easy for us to recycle, right, then we shouldn't charge too much for it. But if it's something that's got to go into the landfill, which we know is very expensive for us, tipping fees and everything else, that we should have a higher fee for it. And what it says is that the producer now has the chance to make a choice. They can make a choice now, and it saves everybody at the end. Instead of doing something that, right now they don't have any reason to care about whether or not it's something that's going to go to the landfill or whether or not it's going to be something that goes to the recycling. That's what this process sets up. It sets up a mechanism for those producers to participate in the process of reducing the overall cost, right, by being a part of the, what at the end is being used for packaging of their products.
All right, so final question, the collected fees then go where?
They go back into our municipalities to help them to pay for the recycling, and also to help them to develop more recycling infrastructure, so that they can be able to receive things that right now we don't have the money in there for them to be able to receive.
And how is that allocated? What type of calculation is?
That is the process of what this bill does. That's where you saw where it sets up, where in MDE, where you've got the regulation to do that, and the PRO, in order to manage that process, to make it such that it does go, such that it is equitable, that it talks about the costs that are associated with the different counties, but making sure that they get that money back where they belong.
Okay, so we're not even setting guardrails, we're just broadly talking about it, and this organization's gonna come by and determine fees and determine the allocation of all this money?
As I said, it's different than it is true that they are going to do that, but it has to be recovering the cost that we're just trying to recover the cost that we're already paying, right? That's where it's trying to do. It's not trying to put it above and beyond that. It's just trying to it's trying to figure out, it's a better mechanism to recover those costs. That's what it's
All right,
saying.
well, I say this because China is not taking our recyclables anymore.
They are not.
I think we're paying for trash twice now in this bill. We're paying
How's
for
that?
trash the first time it takes for our municipalities and counties to collect it, and we're gonna pay for it again through any of the cost impacts that packaging.
No, that's the whole point of where they don't, Senator. So the way that it will go is this: if your area right now, right, because it hasn't had the infrastructure to do it, let's say, for example. But what this will do is we'll say, all right, your county, we're going to invest in your county to put infrastructure to be able to have that stream, to have it go directly into recycling and not have it go into the waste stream. So that it doesn't go into, that's the whole point, is to divert it out of the landfill and to divert it out of that waste stream.
Well, that's the way recycling was supposed to work to begin with.
And that's where we're trying to get it to where it works properly. That's the whole point.
It's become, I guess, it's become
I got a
expensive to try to
I'm gonna get to you. in a
recycle
second.
now. All right, thank you.
I have a question. I'm trying to understand, for people who are low income and struggling, what do they have to do to get their materials recycled?
The whole point of this is that, number one, it doesn't point directly like that in the way that this is set up, Senator, in the sense that it's really moving where we put the cost, okay? And so what I mean by that is, what we're trying to do is we're trying to create an organization where we're collecting money that then can be invested into the municipality or into the county.
Okay.
That would make it so that they can do recycling. Not that they would then be paying for it directly. Those things would be invested into them so that they would be able to recycle. So that we would be able to invest in the unit that can do the recycling so that your local would be able to, to participate in the recycling process.
Okay, but I'm just worried about low-income people.
Yeah, but how? I'm just trying to understand.
When they put out whatever they have that's recyclable,
Yes?
do they have to pay something? They
No.
don't.
No, they do not.
At what point does the money change hands, and from whom to who?
The money changed hands from the brands, so that's like the national brands, that's Tide and all these other folks. They will pay money to the PRO, which is basically paying money to the state to help defray the cost of the recycling. That's what it's trying to do. So they pay in there, and then that money is then sent to the municipality to help pay for the recycling.
I see.
That's how it works.
Okay, Senator Kramer.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and pardon me, but I share your concern, but from a different perspective in that clearly this is going to come with a cost, and that cost is going to be borne by the consumer. And it's the consumers who are least able to afford the cost who are going to be most greatly burdened by this process, in that their daily needs for these packaged goods, their costs are going to be increased. This is not going to somehow just be absorbed by whomever it is that's creating the packaging, unless I'm missing something somewhere in the process. If whoever it is, Procter & Gamble, is now going to be paying a fee in the state of Maryland for the type of packaging, they're not going to just say, okay, we're paying this fee to help local governments do something. The cost of that will absolutely go right into the cost of the product. And so for those people who are already struggling to make ends meet, particularly, and I grant it is short-term right now, that we're seeing this phenomenal inflation, but it will be passed directly on to consumers and those who can least afford it. Please, no, I would welcome
Okay,
that.
sure.
If there's a process by which that does not occur,
So,
I'd
no-
feel more comfortable.
That's perfectly fair. So we're paying for it, all of us are paying for it already, okay? So let's just be clear about that. Right now, when our folks pay for their waste disposal, when they pay for the recycling programs in their taxes and everything else, they are already paying for it. It is where are you putting the payment, okay? So it's not new cost that's created by moving where we put this. That's not what's going on. What it does though, here is what it does do. What it does though, and how it will save people money, is what it says to those producers is do your packaging in a way that costs our overall system less. Right now, they have no reason to do that.
Senator,
And
I
that-
understand that, so let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Instead of this massive new program and pushing those costs onto consumers, and it does, and quite frankly, there was nothing that I gleaned from the explanation you just gave that would indicate it would not, why not just create a scheme where if there is undesirable packaging, that companies that utilize that packaging have to somehow pay a very specified cost that I'm sure our governments could come to us and say, look, if it is red or orange, we can't recycle that. If it's clear or white, whatever that may be, and I recall the discussions about the different colors, then there is a specific cost to us, and that has to then be paid by any manufacturer of a product selling into this marketplace to then incentivize them, yeah, we don't want to absorb that cost. We will now start, or a flat-out prohibition on that product being sold into our marketplace. But this creates a significant bureaucracy, and I'm very concerned that those packaging, that those costs from these producers, it's unequivocal. It will go right back to the consumers.
Senator, good news is that we're having a discussion today.
I
right?
understand.
And so
That's-
I'm certain that you will hear from folks about that there has been absolutely no evidence that these costs have actually been passed on to consumers. That information will be shared with you because we are here to have a conversation today, that there actually has not been evidence of this. This is not something that is new. So I'm willing to appreciate what you're saying, and I'm hopeful, because I don't want to hold this conversation up, to just get you some information about your concern.
But with all due respect, are we to believe that Procter & Gamble, if they have to pay $50 million a year into Maryland to recycle products in the state, that they are just going to write off that $50 million as an expense, or are they going to factor it in to the cost of their product? And it's
As I said,
unequivocal
I'm
they're
not-
going to.
I'm not going to ask that you listen to me on it. I'm going to have those producers actually share it with you, because they actually are a part of the team that's put this together. This was done in a comprehensive way, including the brands and the environmental community, for the very reason, some of the things that you're talking about. So I'm going to definitely have them talk to you about it.
Okay. All right,
Let's
thank
take
you.
one last question on this bill from Senator
Senator.
Klossmeyer.
Augustine, when they came in to show us these things, they had the orange, red Tide thing, or I guess it's orange, or the clear. Why don't they just do all the clear and they could sell everything?
The whole point, Senator, there's no incentive right now for them to do the clear. That's what this bill is for.
Well, the incentive is to save the earth.
Yeah, but they're not willing, that's the whole point. They're not willing to do that without us creating a mechanism for it to make financial sense and to hold them accountable. That's why we're
Well,
doing
why
the
don't we
bill.
bring them in here and kind of
I'll have them talk to you about it. Absolutely.
No, bring them in here. I want Procter and Gamble in here and the Tide makers in here.
It's almost sine die time, and why don't I suggest that if you would tell those who are interested on the committee a time when you're willing to sit down with them, maybe sometime tomorrow or the next day, so they can understand. Okay, and then come back and let the analysts know when we're ready to vote. Okay.
I just have a few more pages to go through really quickly, then we'll get to the rest of the list.
Okay.
So on page 15, and the question came up about local government, there's a section here on page 15 about coming up with a formula for reimburse local government based on various factors. Those are lines 4 through 12. There's additional requirements for how to develop the fee structure. Go to page 16. This begins the department's actual actions where they have to review all the producer responsibility plans submitted. That comes down to the bottom of the page and onto the next page. On page 17, there's an advisory council established, as I mentioned earlier. This council's purpose is, it will consist of broad range of interest stakeholders, and it's to advise these organizations on the development of their plans. This advisory council will also receive the plans and review the plans. If you go to page.
Who chooses the advisory council?
You know what I'm thinking? David, I would suggest that we find a time for a work group, and those who have a lot of questions.
More pages.
But I'm not sure when you finish going through it right now this way,
Okay.
that we'll be ready to do it. Go ahead.
All right. So the Secretary of MDE appoints the members of the Advisory Council. And if you go to page 19, there's authorization for local governments to request reimbursement for picking up these products. On the bottom, there is, beginning on March 1st, 2027, these organizations have to give comprehensive reports to MDE, and that takes you through to page 21. There's a requirement for a third-party audit of these organizations' actions. And then on the bottom of the page, that specifies any person participating in a responsibility plan is immune from liability. There's that there. And then on through, there's some enforcement and penalty provisions in the bill. So that's the bill quickly, in summary.
All right. We've gone through it, but clearly there are still a lot of questions. I'm not sure people are understanding the parameters of the bill. So we're going to hold it tonight, and you organize those who want to know more, and then we can bring it back for vote. Okay.
So let's continue on the list. 5 and 11 and 430 will come up last. Let's go straight to House Bill 373. This was heard last week. It requires the Maryland Department of Health to ensure that the number of the state postmortem examiners commission staff does not fall to a level that constitutes a Phase 2 violation. As you all know, there's been a lot of news about the backlog and.
Okay, any discussion on the motion? All right, all in favor, please raise your hand. All right, that's unanimous.
Okay. The next bill, this was heard last week. It's a local bill. There are right now, there are serious prohibitions regarding polygraph, administration of polygraphs by employers in the state. There are several exemptions to this requirement. This would add that an applicant for employment as a paramedic or EMT in St. Mary's County or with the St. Mary's County Emergency Communications Center would be subject to polygraph by St. Mary's County. It has the support of the St. Mary County's senator.
All right, do we have a second?
Local bill. Second.
Okay. All in favor, please raise your hand. All in favor, raise your hand. Local county won't support it, but. Okay.
The House doesn't treat our local bills the same way.
Okay. Is your hand up, Senator? It was. Okay, all right, that's unanimous.
Okay. The next bill on your list, this bill requires 3 specified community action agencies in collaboration with the local health department to make feminine hygiene products available at no cost and in amounts sufficient to meet the needs of the woman obtaining the products. The House amended the bill to specify that these 3 designated agencies in those 3 counties, Calvert, 4 counties, Culver, Charles, Prince George's, and Baltimore County would participate in the program. I asked why those are the ones who stepped up willing to do it. So there is no amendments required to the bill.
All right, any discussion? All in favor, please raise your hands. Okay, let's call the roll.
House Bill 588, favorable. Senator Feldman? Aye. Senator Klausmeier? Yes. Senator Benson? Yes. Senator Kramer? Yes. Senator Hayes? Yes. Senator Reedy? No. Senator Augustine? Yes. Senator Hershey? No. Senator Jennings? Yes. Madam Chair?
Yes,
Yes.
all right.
Okay, the next bill is the cross-file to the school bus driver study bill from Senator Rosa Pep. The House amended it differently. They require the Department of Transportation, in consultation with the State Education Department, to conduct a study. The Transportation sent a letter or sent an email saying that they have nothing to do with bus drivers. I think the sponsor would prefer that you amend the House bill to the Senate bill. To conform the House bill to the Senate bill.
All right, any discussion on the motion? Not all in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, that's unanimous, thank you.
Okay, and this bill, House Bill 1078 was on the voting list yesterday, and it was held. This is the bill that would require the Cannabis Commission to study the use of this particular chemical that comes from hemp. And there was the House added language that would prohibit the selling of any product that contains these particular chemicals identified in the bill to anybody under the age of 21. There was, Senator Hayes had held the bill because of certain products. And my understanding is there's not a lot of information about this chemical and those products, but you could formulate a product that could seep into your skin and cause a slight high. So, but there's not a lot of study on this type of information out there. And so I don't know where there were 2 amendments offered by Senator Feldman, and one by Senator Feldman and Senator Klausmeier, which added folks to the study part of the bill. And I think you've already adopted those, but now we're left with the criminal law prohibition about selling these products to anybody under the age of 21.
All right, Senator
Favorable
Hayes.
as amended.
Okay?
Any discussion on the motion? All right, I call the roll.
House Bill 1078, favorable as amended. Senator Feldman? Aye. Senator Klausmeier? Yes. Senator Benson? Yes. Senator Kramer? Yes. Senator Hayes? Yes. Senator Reedy? Yes. Senator Augustine? Yes. Senator Hershey? Yes. Senator Jennings? Yes. Madam Chair?
Yes,
Yes.
all right, that's
Okay,
unanimous.
no. All right, now back to Senate Bill 511. You should have a reprint in front of you. You have the House bill here too. This requires specific qualifications for the Secretary of Aging. The Senate bill, there's a reprint which would conform the bill to the House bill and strike the bachelor degree requirement for the Secretary of Aging.
Okay. All right, do we have a second? Okay, Senator Kramer?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and I will share with the committee and the public world, this would have no impact on our current sitting Secretary of the Department of Aging.
Right.
So going forward, colleagues, let's try to figure out what the problem is that this legislation is going to solve. And to date, I don't think I have a clue what that might be or what these requirements might accomplish. But I think it's important that we look at the bill and try to evaluate exactly what it is that it does and also as we go down the slippery slope of trying to determine for every governor going forward what their department heads will be required to have perhaps knowledge of or a skill set related to. So under this bill, it indicates that an individual appointed as the secretary must have extensive experience with knowledge of laws, legislation, and regulations relating to aging. Colleagues, our department heads, I would proffer, are far better off having knowledge of administration, management, knowing how to find grant money, knowing how to manage employees, in some instances, hundreds or thousands of employees. And I am not quite certain what the extensive experience with and knowledge of laws, legislation, and regulations might entail. Colleagues, in my 16 years in this chamber, I have sponsored 15 successful bills specific to our senior residents in the state, including our Maryland Silver Alert, including the first law in the country that made Maryland a state to criminalize the use of undue influence when taking the assets of a senior. The first bill in the nation, the only one, that has created a statewide senior call check program. The only state in the nation that has afforded its attorney general the authority to step into the shoes of a financially exploited senior.
Sounds like you ought to be our next Secretary of Aging.
If that is the basis for the qualification for me to be secretary, Madam Chair, I am looking like a genius. But I'm still trying to figure out, when we are talking about departments with hundreds of employees, with layers of management, with skill sets that relate to how do we manage those employees? How do we put the assets out to the community? How do we manage and administrate those assets? But let's continue. The bill further states that in order to be qualified, the individual needs to demonstrate a commitment to the missions of both the Federal Older Americans Act and the Department of Aging. Demonstrate a commitment. What does that mean, Madam Chair? Is that, thank you, Senator Hayes just asked the same question. And does that mean you say, I pledge allegiance to the mission of the Federal Older Americans Act and this department that I will be having oversight of? Is that what we want to put into law,
If I could,
Madam Chair?
butt in, it would seem to me that there are two different ways of going at how you do it. We did make similar changes this year for the Department of Health Secretary. And it's, do we want good managers generically, and people who have good administrative skills generically, and is that sufficient? Or do we want them to know something about the history and the structure of the laws and the circumstances of the particular population that they, especially when it's a vulnerable one? And so I think that whoever the bill was put in by is probably just thinking that, and I mean, it's something for us to decide one way or the other, you know.
I agree, it is something that we
All right,
need to
Senator
decide
Reed.
one way or the other.
Okay, I get you.
Senator Klausmeier was first, I think.
Okay.
Ask Senator Kramer if and I agree, management, looking for different grants, all the things that you just said are very important. Can we add that to the bill? Does that make you feel any more comfortable?
Amended to the bill.
Does that make you feel any more comfortable?
I would think that anyone who has been elected to be governor of this state will be looking at their department heads with such thought and with such process that they will be finding, and that's what we allow our governors to do, find the most competent individuals for the myriad of state agencies based on the demands and the needs of being a department head. This is a bill that is desperately looking for a problem. And I just think it is a huge mistake. I mean, where does this language even come from? They need, before they can be appointed, to demonstrate a commitment to the mission of the Federal Older Americans Act. First of all, I'm guessing anyone who's appointed could quickly learn and understand the Federal Older Americans Act. Are we to believe that an individual appointed to this agency is not going to be committed to supporting the Federal Older Americans Act? Are they going to come in and say, no, we're throwing this out, I have no commitment to this? I'm just questioning.
Okay.
Where does this language even come from?
All right, you raised a lot of good questions. Let's hear from Senator Reedy.
So I remember a former colleague of some of yours. She was not a former colleague of mine because I was in the legislature, but there was a senator named Gloria Lawler who became Secretary of Aging under Governor Malley. I'm assuming this bill would have impacted her. I was going to ask my friend from Montgomery County, if I'm not mistaken, the Secretary of Aging comes before the Senate Executive Noms Committee, whereby someone would be able to ask her or him any myriad of questions to determine if they or do not have sufficient knowledge to run the department. Correct? I mean, am I right in saying that?
Senator, you are spot on.
So it seems to me, I think I agree with you. There's a friend of mine, one of the delegates I serve with over in the House who's on HGO, often asks, what's the problem we're trying to solve? And I agree with you. I can't seem to find a problem that this bill is solving.
Well, there are a lot of ways that if each of us had to hire anybody for anything, we might go about it, and some people would put some variables ahead of other variables. And if I were running for a position like that, I would study such things, is what you're talking about, before I'd come. But certainly, our executive nom, and we were putting icing on the cake, we are not in position to really critically look at the people. I think it's,
There's already,
okay,
never mind. I was going to propose something here, but there's already.
okay.
Now,
Who's?
what happened with our Secretary of Health bill?
Did we pass it, didn't we? I know it passed out of
What are we
here.
talking about?
Secretary of
happened to
Health, what
Secretary?
happened?
Past that,
We passed it,
but it's a different issue.
Well,
okay,
it's a different issue. One's older and one's Secretary of Health.
okay.
I mean, look, as somebody who is minority leader, when Hogan came into office, I had to fight to try to get some of his appointees through. And I remember Pete Rahm, Secretary of Transportation, they were arguing, well, he doesn't have enough experience. And he had an incredible resume. And, I had to meet with different members on exec noms trying to prove that, yes, he is qualified. And I understand where Senator Kramer's coming from, because it is the governor to decide who he wants on his team. It is up to us to determine yes or no, do they finally get that vote from us? And, it's up to exec noms to ask the tough questions. Hey, do you think you're qualified? With Department of Health, they're both very important departments. Don't think that different of that. But health was more specific, dealing with what we've dealt with in the last 2 years, getting into more hospitals and issues like that, where they have to understand that. Aging, if they had a more specific idea, as I've read what Senator Kramer's pointed out, it's kind of broad, so.
Okay,
A rhetorical question.
next, Senator Augustine, then Senator Feldman.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. So the way that I am looking at this is that this helps to direct to that the secretary has this knowledge in this area. It's actually very similar to the Department of Health. The Department of Aging, for example, deals with, I'm sorry, there's second conversations going on, Madam Chair. There's a lot of other conversations going on.
Senator, is that conversation disrupting?
It is, it really is disrupting
Yeah,
you.
we
I
should
would appreciate
be
it if you would
civil,
be
yeah.
a little more respectful. Thank you.
You were more than welcome, but I will
Okay.
engage in conversation with my colleagues at any point in time that I choose.
So you'll continue to be disrespectful?
It has nothing to do with respect, Senator.
I would suggest that it does.
All right, well,
Okay,
let's
so
finish.
what I was saying is, the Department of Aging, for example, deals with dementia and dementia care. These are really vulnerable Marylanders when we're dealing in the Department of Aging. And I think that they actually are, that there really is a need for us to have someone who has these kinds of experiences to be able to feel good, feel comfortable that they will be equipped for something that's so important. We know, or we've been very concerned, I believe, which was our conversation around the Department of Health, about people not being qualified, being in these positions that are so very important. And I think that's really what this is. This is just simply saying guardrails does an additive, of course, for the administrative skills and everything else that would be required. That, of course, goes on top. But that's where I see this bill coming out. Thank you.
Senator Feldman.
So my sense from the committee here is this can be a close vote, and we're missing now 2 senators. And so, I'm just going to throw out the possibility of holding this bill today, unless somebody's, really eager to vote on it. I think it's a little unfair to, well, yeah, but I didn't hold it.
Unfair to what?
I'm exercising my one hold day on this particular piece of legislation. Senator Kramer.
Okay.
No, that's fine, Madam Chair. I was just looking through this bill, listening to the references about Alzheimer's. I see nothing in the bill that makes reference to Alzheimer's and that vulnerable population, but I would also proffer to the committee that this is, as all departments are, agencies filled with layers of management and employees, all of whom bring specific skill sets to the department. And I think if we start trying to determine that, for instance, in this department, the secretary needs to be a master in all things Alzheimer's, all things dementia, all things related to aching knees or sore backs, whatever it may be, that we are being a little bit prescriptive and excessive and losing sight of what these departments are, how they're managed, and how they've been managed for decades without having had this kind of, and again, very, I think, challenging language that certainly carries little if no meaning with it.
Okay,
So,
well, why don't
thank
we
you.
do this? It's getting late. Let's put it on hold tonight, and at our next voting session, we can try to consider.
Okay, I think that's done. We're done voting.